So Ben Shapiro just got a text. To me, this is kind of like so it begins. Like, it's like so our radical left wing government is gonna now do the same thing that every other left wing government in all the other Western democracies, Australia, the EU, Justin Trudeau in Canada, they're all trying to do this whole misinformation claim now and just claim that everything that they don't agree with is now misinformation and you can get in trouble for it. It's literally like I saw this coming, and it's just going to be much more of it if Democrats win. Like you'll probably never see a video like this again.
Been debunked or are not supported with credible evidence. Researchers identified videos posted by you in those 4 months that contain election misinformation. We feature a clip of you saying, quote, "Your party rigged many of the voting rules in advance of the election in order to ensure an extraordinary number of mail-in ballots, ballot harvesting." I also have a few questions. 1, are you a member of the YouTube Partner Program? 2, if so, how frequently does YouTube demonetize your videos? 3, has YouTube sent you messages, emails, or notices in the last year that your content contains misinformation? Thanks for your time. So,
y'all even understand how crazy this is? How just completely insane?
Like, going on here? This is not just a text. This is the October surprise. Here's what the New York Times was planning, pretty obviously and clearly. Working with Media Matters for America, which is a far-left radical organization that was started by David Brock in an overt attempt to destroy all conservative media. That is why Media Matters was launched. It was launched in order to astroturf boycotts on conservative media and anyone who would advertise with conservative media. Media Matters became incredibly famous by essentially launching secondary boycotts on people like Rush Limbaugh. They've tried it with us as well. They've tried it with our hosts. This is what they do. The New York Times is overtly, clearly admitting to using Media Matters research in order to pressure YouTube to demonetize people on the right, to destroy them, because when you are demonetized, that also limits your reach, to destroy their dissemination of information 1 week prior to an election. That's what's going on here. It turns out the October surprise from our media is an overt attempt, along with Media Matters. Again, both of these parties are Democratic apparatchiks, Media Matters and the New York Times, in order to silence dissent 1 week out from an election. That is what this is about. That's what the text is about. That's the entire game. You run an article on the front page of the New York Times saying YouTube is subsidizing election misinformation. And that pressures YouTube, which, by the way, is Google, which is the #1 donor to the Democratic Party, the #1 donor to the Democratic Party, push them to censor any and all hosts, any and all information that disagrees with the left. Because here's the thing. They didn't just reach out to me. As we now know, they reached out to...
In other words, like, without you guys' help, channels like mine have absolutely no chance of growing. I swear that we already get shadow banned. To pretty much prove it to you that it's happening, because like there's these people on YouTube right now that are posting videos of things that happen at like congressional hearings and stuff, and they're getting like 300,000-400,000 views in like one day, and then I'll like upload the same video with like a couple comments on it, and it'll stay on like 0 views for like 3 days. It's pretty crazy, the stuff that's going on right now.
Much everybody on the right, other hosts from the Daily Wire, people like Tucker Carlson, they reach out to everyone on the right. Why? Because their goal is to shut the spigot off so you can't get any information on places like YouTube. 26% of Americans get their news from YouTube, according to Pew. Now, that number theoretically is even higher, because those are people who are getting most of their news from YouTube. But there are people...
Yeah, I mean, I get all my news from YouTube, pretty much. But I don't watch CNN, MSNBC, CBS, ABC, the typical mainstream hacks. I don't watch them anymore. I just scroll past. They advertise the shit out of them to me. I just scroll past them. But, what are they going to do? Like, censor all news outlets that don't agree with them? This is crazy. Story about this text and being reached out to, that way they kind of self-report themselves as misinformation. You know, like what would this be about? I just got in an argument with my dad about this, like, because I told him, I'm like, you know, you sit there and you believe everything that your phone shoots at you to read. You get all your information off of Google, which is like one of the main donors for the Kamala Harris campaign. And you sit there and read all the shit that straight from the tool that they're trying to use to demonize Donald Trump and elect her, and believe everything that you read straight off the headline as if it's gospel, which is pretty much what's happening right now. And not to mention that like 3/4 of the news outlets are already um, far left leaning and report absolute nonsense about Donald Trump. 3/4 of them are already far left leaning. So 3/4 of the content is already negative about the Democrats and or about the Republicans and Donald Trump. And so they pull little bits of content and then, you know, Google's paying, like actually donating money to the campaign on top of all that. So they're getting help, and already 3/4 of the content is already negative, and they're getting help to push the negative content even further. You know, they've basically bought the mainstream media news organizations, CNN, MSNBC, CBS, maybe not CBS, it's ABC, you know, but I think CBS has been in on it too, like quite a few times, but they basically bought them. So they got the mainstream media news organizations bought, basically, and then 75% of all the content is already negative about the Republicans, about Donald Trump, demonizing Donald Trump, outright lies about Donald Trump, and it's just the stuff that's going on is absolutely crazy. They don't care that their base is literally living in a fabricated reality right now. They just don't care. They keep pushing. See, that's what bothers me so much about this is they're the ones doing the crazy, the dumb, insane, radical socialist type, and then turning around and try, like when we comment on it, then they turn around and try to say, oh, that's misinformation because you didn't get the semantics right. You didn't say it right. You didn't say it exactly how it happened. You know, and then try to call it misinformation. Like that's what they did about the FEMA funds being paid to migrants, which definitely happened. It's 100% fact, but yet they're trying, and then we mention it, then they try to say, oh no, that's misinformation. It's not true. Because it was two separate funds. I don't care. There's video of Karine Jean-Pierre from 2022 directing migrants, talking about the FEMA funds, you know, and how they can get money from the FEMA funds. The numbers I seen, like I looked it up, it was on their own website. They spent like basically $1 billion in 2 years, 674 million one year, 300 some million in another, on housing migrants and other things. And then you're going to turn, and then we mention it, you're going to try to call it misinformation because we didn't specify that there's actually two funds in FEMA. Like, get out of here, man. Y'all are out of your minds. We're going to succeed our government to a group of socialists if we don't stop this madness.
That I believe that Joe Biden won the 2020 election. I thought that Donald Trump had every right to legally challenge that election.
Right. He did win, but it was at the very least, if you don't say they cheated, at the very least, it was extremely unfair. Google's literally feeding people, basically, essentially, they're spending all this money to get her elected. They're basically feeding people articles they want them to read, proving things as misinformation that was actually fact. 75% of the content is already negative about them, and they're boosting all these companies with these, you know, to boost these negative stories, these misinformation lies and everything else. They're saying outright lies about Donald Trump on the air, things that can't even be remotely true. Like actually Donald Trump is the one that house the migrants. Like, wait, what? Excuse me? Like, things that can't even be remotely true. And like, so at the very least, this year, it's already been unfair. Like this, that's another reason why this is just crazy, man.
But I did not see the actual evidence that the allegations he was making about the election itself and fraud in the election was sufficient to overcome the state certification of the ballots.
Right.
So of all the people to come to about election misinformation, coming to me is just proof. It is just absolute proof. This has nothing to do with election misinformation. It has to do instead with silencing anybody on the right.
That is
the goal.
correct.
This is always the goal for the left. It's always the goal for the New York Times. Think about how crazy this is. You have the New York Times, which is supposed to be the tip of the spear in terms of freedom of the press and free speech, which is overtly, clearly attempting to pressure the biggest video platform on planet Earth to shut off other press outlets. That's crazy. They say it's a challenge to the press if Donald Trump calls them fake news. Imagine if we here at the Daily Wire called for the New York Times to be completely demonetized and shut down on social media because of misinformation.
Right.
Would that not be a challenge to free speech principles? It's unbelievable.
They're off their rocker with this Trump derangement, and Trump is a regular Republican. Please fucking realize that. Yeah, some bad things happened during the election. He felt like it was unfair. He challenged it. That's what people do when they think they've been unfairly treated. It caused a little bit of uproar on January 6th, a little riot, which they lied and said is an insurrection.
What's hilarious is that even the quote they sent me, which was supposed to be election misinformation, right? The quote where I said, apparently, quote, your party rigged many of the voting rules in advance of the election in order to ensure an extraordinary number of mail-in ballots, ballot harvesting. Well, I mean, if they're mad about that, they might want to talk to the New York Times. Here is 538 writing just a couple of years ago, quote, one of the most striking aspects of the 2020 election was the unprecedented use of mail-in voting. Nearly half of all voters cast a ballot by mail in 2020, a record share, according to the latest survey of the performance of American elections.
Right. And nearly half the other people didn't even know you could vote mail-in ballot.
A post-election poll of tens of thousands of registered voters run by MIT. Much of this was driven by COVID-19. States changed voting rules and requirements to make it easier to vote by mail. And voters hoping to avoid crowded polling places in the middle of a pandemic took advantage. Wait, that sounds like rigging the voting rules in order to, increase mail-in balloting. Maybe they ought to fact-check the New York Times. The New York Times ought to fact-check the New York Times for election misinformation. Maybe they ought to fact-check CBS News about ballot harvesting. Quote, the Nevada Assembly passed legislation that would allow the state to mail a ballot to every registered voter, and the bill allows for third parties to collect ballots. Pearson argues that the threat to Postal Service funding and the warning of mail delays makes ballot assistance even more important. But critics argue it opens the door to abuse and interference. The Nevada law does not limit how many ballots a person can collect. The Trump re-election campaign filed a lawsuit against the measure in Nevada and in other states. Wait, that sounds like rigging the rules so as to increase ballot harvesting. Maybe they should fact check for election information. CBS News. But it's not about that. By the way, even if you disagree with me, even if you think that the election was rigged and Trump won, that's still protected by the First Amendment. Obviously. But this is amazing. So in 2020, the late-breaking media interference came in the form of shutting down the Hunter Biden laptop story. The New York Post had the Hunter Biden laptop story, and the social media bros were pressured into taking down that story by both the press and by members of the federal intelligence agencies. And so they shut it down. They throttled it. They prevented dissemination of the story on places like Facebook and on Twitter, because this is before Elon owned Twitter, obviously. Well, now they are doing something even more overt. They are overtly attempting to just shut down all conservative dissemination of information on the biggest video platform in existence 1 week in advance of an election. If that's not an attempt to rig an election, I don't know what is. I mean, if you rig the entire informational environment around an election, that obviously...
This is what I mean, man. Like, this is how it's just more proof that this is a insane regime we're dealing with here. Like, it's so crazy. It's actually mind-blowing. What did they think was going to happen by something like this? Imagine if they got their way and just shut up every single conservative speaker on the radio and on YouTube in this last week to the election. What they think is going to happen when people find out about that. They're so dumb. This is what I mean. Only these socialist type of people would think one step ahead like this and not think step 2, 3, and 4, what's going to happen, because they're so incompetent. It's mind-blowing. Like, I literally can't, like, I can't live in the delusion that they want me to live in. I refuse to do it.
Has a rather large impact on the election. We're told by these people that the Russians manipulated America into voting for Donald Trump in 2016. But here they are, the same people, openly saying that they want YouTube to demonetize and thus throttle all conservative content on YouTube 1 week in advance of an election. Because that's what this is about. That's what this is about. I mean, we know what the New York Times...
It is just wildly insane that this is really happening.